Yeah, well, this was a case of all through childhood, um, so many trips to hospitals, clinics, and various other establishments, um, blood blood tests, X-rays, that on the normal medical side of things. So many of that sort of testing went on all through childhood, but going to various other places, which included Harwell. I was later to find out in the 60s. Harwell was a place I'd been taken to a number of times. These were more tests of a psychic nature. They wanted to see psychokinesis, telepathy, things of that nature. They picked out those that had certain abilities at least a minimum level.
Hmm.
Obviously, those that were tested that had greater abilities were sent to other establishments and further testing. There was one place, it's a military hospital, I won't name it, it still exists, west of London, where we were sent very frequently.
Uh-huh.
Uh, so we were tested there. Silly things to start off with, you asked to sit in a room and to make things move,
Hmm.
and to turn out light bulbs, silly things like that. But as a child, it's quite something, and we were always rewarded when we did well, and punished when we didn't. Um, at one particular stage, we were taken outside into the courtyard, and there sat an old World War II tank, and the children were asked in small groups, hold hands and move that tank. I mean, you had civilians there, and you also had people in uniforms.
Hmm.
I do remember the army uniforms there, some sort of officer, and quite sternly, a group of us were asked to move that tank literally as far as you can, and obviously the further you can move it, the better the reward will be later on. And we actually did move that tank a few yards forward, and we had quite a reward that day.
I would imagine you did.
I mean, as young children in very austere Britain after the war years, sweets, candy,
Right,
were
right.
in very, very short supply, But if we did well, we would have, all we could eat.
Okay, so move me forward now to a landmark place where you began to become aware, perhaps, of other experiences that were occurring.
Okay, well, we skip where I saw a large disc coming down towards me at the age of 10. We'll skip that then, and we'll go on to, let's see, early 70s.
Okay.
That's when I began. Well, I began looking into the UFO subject because it really fascinated me in '66. I read everything I could about the subject. It got under my skin. I really had to know what the hell was going on. What are these things? So I got into that subject at the age of 14. And by 72, I was already with an organisation investigating these things. And in 72 was when I first crossed paths with the NSA, who were to play a large part in things later on.
Was the NSA connecting with you because of your activities working in UFO research?
Yes and no. They were primarily watching what was going on in the backgrounds during childhood because they were very interested in this genetic survey and watching and targeting may be the wrong word. They were profiling certain individuals for later life
Mm-hmm.
and for later use. A UFO incident in 1970 may have been when I came under their scrutiny. That's when two youngsters were found dead in Chingford in Essex after heavy UFO activity in the area. Now, I did cross paths with a number of people at that time, and perhaps I ruffled a few feathers, as one or two other investigators may have done too. But in '72, that's when I actually confronted them face to face.
So were they actually watching you at the time and with an eye on recruiting you to use you for future projects?
Later, being allowed to go through certain files, yes, that was the case. I didn't obviously know it at the time. In '72, I just
Because I
thought,
would imagine you were already on their radar even from childhood, if everything else that you told me is equal, because it seems they're very good at following anybody that has the kind of
yeah,
profile that you would present.
that is what I found out later on during the later part of the '70s when I was given access to a lot of files in London. Yeah, it all then made sense. Obviously, up until that point, I'm trying to connect the dots. What's going on here? Why this? Why that? And it made a lot of sense then when I saw the actual documentation. But certainly, yeah, they were profiling during the '60s and getting ready for when the time was right. And when the time was right was, of course, '79 in the base in Berkshire.
During the period of time, and you talked about a UFO sighting at 10. That's interesting as well.
Hmm.
Did you receive any training, any augmentation, anything? For instance, in the U.S. in the from the late '50s through as nearly as we can document, probably the late '70s, we had Project Talent.
Hmm.
I've interviewed Duncan O'Finian, I guess, over 4 hours, who was part of Project Talent, and Duncan was taken, basically taken from his family and taken off to be trained as, I guess, what you now call the super soldiers.
Yeah.
Did you receive any training? Were you a part of any type program similar to Project Talent?
There may have been similarities, but you've got to bear in mind there are two facets to this. I don't like to use the term super soldier,
No,
to
I
be
don't like it.
honest.
Neither do most of the people who were under those projects.
Yeah, but let's leave it as that for now. But certainly, yeah, there are two facets to that. There is the physical side. That's those like Duncan who would have
Right.
gone through various training for physical work. He would have gone out and done various missions physically. He would have done this and done that. On the other side of the coin is the psychic side, which I was involved in. So certainly, yes, they were those with certain abilities who met a certain criteria were herded into different establishments to further those abilities, and we were put to use to do various things, but on the more psychic rather than the physical side.
Okay. You have a background in remote viewing, remote influencing. Did you
Mhm.
receive training in that? Obviously, that's a gifting. It's also something that can be developed. Can you give me a little bit of
Yeah,
background in your work in remote viewing?
yeah. Well, after they found I and a number of others, obviously in the facility, had a natural talent or ability to do certain things. Obviously, they wanted to progress that. Obviously, naive little children are not going to know why we're doing these things, why we're being trained, and what's happening. You don't know, you don't realise until later on. But certainly, it was for a military use. Um, let's see. They were not put into um, real use until '79 at that facility in Berkshire.
Okay.
All the training and the making sure the abilities were honed to the desired level up until that time, but they weren't actually put into practice until '79 when they knew, yeah, this one can do so and so, is going to be useful. And of course, that was a Cold War time anyway, because all the things I did were Cold War targets anyway.
Hmm. Were you also involved in targeting and psychically acting upon targets? And when I say targets, I can mean either physical locations or even people?
Hmm. Probably both. We were usually given a set of instructions of either an individual that they wanted to be tracked
Mm-hmm.
and, if necessary, removed. The same with installations or facilities. If they wanted someone to actually go in, check out a specific facility, usually in Russia, detail what's going on there, and, if necessary, make that facility inoperative. So yeah, it depends on the task of the day. Certainly, a lot of influencing was done with individuals, and unfortunately, yes, a few individuals are no longer around.
Yeah, the dropout rate on programs, I imagine that's kind of high as well.
Yeah, yeah. You can burn out very quick, because there was so much of a rush. 79 and 80, as I said, you've got to bear in mind it was Cold War. There was a lot going on, a lot of tension, a lot of stress. They wanted various things sorted out. So yeah, at times they couldn't rely just on the individual's abilities. Sometimes you had to get hooked up to a computer to get boosted, if you like,
Mm-hmm.
to make sure that that specific task was carried out 100%.
You seem to have maybe sketchy memories about some of this. Do you believe that at times you were used for projects and then memory wiped?
That's more than likely. There've been a number of instances where the memory has gone, and I've been fortunate to regain memory either naturally or forced. But there's always certain areas that just remain sketchy. Yeah,
Right, yeah. So maybe years later, you tend to recapture a few of those memories. They just come back in like brief flashes and things like that.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
okay. Moving through that period, the Cold War period, and where are you at during this period of time? You're operating out of a base where?
Yeah. Now, between July 79 and January of 81, there's a facility in Berkshire, the
Uh-huh.
Peasemore facility.
Mm-hmm.
That's a joint NSA United States Air Force facility. So most of it was based there.
Now you're a UK national
Hmm.
being employed by Air Force and NSA. Can you give me any information about the overlap between the British projects, the US projects, and any overlap between other intelligence agencies, such as Mossad or other European intelligence agencies?
Well, it's funny you mentioned Mossad. Yeah, that particular agency are working hand in glove with both the US and the UK. The same goes with the FSB. They're the top boys as well. Now, the interrelation between a certain project run jointly by the UK and the USA. Over in the States, it was Montauk.
Right.
Over here, it was Mannequin, but they were virtually the same program.
Tell me a little bit about Project Mannequin and how that operated and the parallels between that and the Montauk project. I think we've got a fairly good picture of the Montauk project over the years from a number of different witnesses.
Yeah.
A little sketchier about Mannequin and what that involved.
Yeah, well, obviously everyone knows about Montauk.
Largely because of Peter Nichols, he's been out there putting information out for a long time.
Mhm. Okay, the parallels mainly are to do with the mind control aspect. Now, the guy who used to run Mannequin at the base here in the UK actually travelled across to the US countless times and oversaw a number of projects that Montauk were running at the time.